Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Chris Kucher of Project 44. We're going to be having a conversation about real-time visibility in the supply chain, what it can do for supply chain professionals, what's new in the space. I'm really excited for this one. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
I know you've been having some conversations with senior supply chain executives who are talking about, visibility in their supply chain, some of the pain points, and what knowing when things are happening in real time can do for them. Can you walk us through what's new in the space?
Absolutely. I think it's less of what is new as much as how the industry has evolved over the past decade, because you have events like obviously the COVID crisis where people didn't know where their containers were, when it was going to hit the port. Then it became domestic strikes, cross-border moves. Then you have the Red Sea crisis. So I think it's less of what's evolved, but more so the mindset of how executives need to get a better grasp on where is my inventory? When will this critical customer delivery make its final arrival? Will the customer be notified? How do we reduce the back and forth of carrier versus customer versus technology system, people, process, technology? Getting data in your hands as quickly as possible, that's what's changed. The Amazon-like effect of understanding when will it arrive. I want to know down to the minute, so I can plan for better operations, labor planning, or just demand planning. That tends to be more of a trend of how companies are understanding it's no longer it gets here when it gets here, and I don't know who to point. It's I want to know before it happens when something's going wrong so I can mitigate that strategy in advance. That's where the industry of visibility has moved to.
So it's more about evolving expectations than evolving capabilities. What are they doing to make sure that they're meeting that changed expectation?
I would totally agree with that. We define this, everyone wants this high velocity supply chain. The expectation of having a nimble, high velocity supply chain is what Project 44 helps power. If you have the awareness and the knowledge in advance of where things are, when they're hitting the port, what the delays are, when that container is available for pickup, when it's going to arrive at your yard, how do you automate that gate automation in dock door scheduling to improve better transfer point efficiency? That's where companies are relying on more technology to proactively alert their team and improve the expectations, because before it's been a black box. And I think finally people, especially the frontline workers, are trying to plan for things. They've never had that data at their fingertips. It's been more of a transportation analyst level or carrier relationship level. But what about S&OP teams? What about demand planning teams? What about yard operation teams? They're now improving their expectation of when data can meet them at their source.
So a lot of this is actually about democratizing data. Rather than it being one subject matter expert in a corporate headquarters somewhere, it can actually be communicated to people on the docks, people on the railway side.
Fantastic way of putting it, because visibility in past was helping someone who managed a broker relationship or a truckload or a steamship line relationship of when it's going to hit the port. But financial teams, demand planning teams, sales teams, their customers are saying, when will this arrive in my facility? I have a critical production order that you are a piece of my puzzle. If this order doesn't arrive on time, I can't continue my building. So a lot of these middleware OEM type companies, they're so reliant on customer commits. So it's democratizing the data to people who actually are communicating that data and what it means to them for their planning purposes. I love the way you put that.
Oh, thank you. Why don't we talk about what makes Project 44 a leader in the space? You've been working in this space for a long while. Obviously, you try to stay at the very cutting edge. Talk about your organization.
Yeah, Project 44, from the origin of our company, we've been focused on building the largest network in the world. Now, we've raised a significant amount of capital to build the highest quality connections to any mode of transportation in any geography. That really differentiates us because it's all about garbage in, garbage out. We get first-party data in, we normalize it, we cleanse it, we enrich it, and then we give the consumer the best data possible across any function. So it's not just where's my truck, where's my shipment, where's my container, but it's based on all the events and patterns we're seeing on the road, on the water, in the air. How can we give a predictive ETA to then normalize that? And not just at the transportation level, at the PO level, at the SKU level. Also, based on that transportation, what are my scope 3 emissions? Am I measuring this? Sustainability is a massive, massive focus. If you can't fix it, you can't measure it. You can't measure it, can't fix it, I should say. And a lot of the times what we're finding is scope 3 is the hardest to measure because you don't manage that freight, you don't manage that yourself. Scope 1 is material you're leveraging for your product. Project 44 has invested significant capital in ensuring that we're able to give you the most accurate Scope 3 emissions based on that lane chosen, that carrier, that engine type. So trying to improve that net zero emission target that so many large companies are focusing on. So it's not just that cross-functional awareness of who's consuming the data at what granularity, but what's my impact on the globe if I choose this carrier, and what's my network design because of that. So Project 44 takes a really network-first approach, a very API-first approach to meet customers and shippers where they are with their network today.
As you're describing this, I have to think there are people whose whole job is one small part of what Project 44 can help them with. How do we work with the usability in terms of, a senior executive needs this piece and somebody right at the front line needs a smaller portion, maybe the sustainability person needs this data vertical. How do you decide who sees what that is relevant to them?
It's a really good question. It goes back to when I mentioned we built this network effect and we're a very API-first company. Our movement platform is a manifestation of 10 years of research, development, acquisition, strategy, and that is meant for people who want to understand maybe how do I optimize a certain portfolio of a carrier or a certain supplier or a certain product type. But potentially, you have frontline workers who are used to working in an SAP ERP, for example. They don't want to be introduced to a whole new interface. But for demand planning purposes or sales forecast purposes, they don't want to leave that interface. We can very easily push our data into the environment of an ERP system and allow that individual internally to just figure out what is the Project 44 ETA for this source. A great way to meet them where they are. Other instances, we're actually part of the customer's conversation to their customers. So our shipper customers, they might have a portal that their customers log into, and P44 pushes our ETA into that customer-facing application. So we're very flexible in where we push. But I also think it's important to understand when you look at internal versus external users, movement might be more of a quarter-over-quarter reporting purpose. If you're an executive, you want to understand, hey, how are my carriers performing this quarter? What lanes are the most delinquent? Where are my Scope 3 emissions the highest? On what carrier type? That might be a reporting that you want to look at maybe every month or 2 months, but you don't need to necessarily be there in every minute of the platform. So P44 is really going from not just the inventory in transit, really real-time exception management, but also network optimization, Scope 3 emissions, and looking at how can you use your analytics that we have in Project 44 based on the carriers you leverage? That's more of a reporting on QBRs. So I think it all depends on how you want the data, how real time for decision making versus reactively quarter over quarter. How are you planning and optimizing your network? And that's where I think our platform is more suited for more executive facing audiences, but potentially if you don't want to disrupt the daily systems of record, we can push our data into there.
I wonder if we can get into some specifics about Project 44, because it's a global concept and it's a global service, but of course there must be things happening every day that are exciting and worth sharing. What would you want to showcase for us, given the chance?
Absolutely, and I think when we look at end-to-end visibility, that's a very key differentiator. A lot of companies are global in nature. For example, we now have a large presence in China. We got Prime Minister approval to track mainland China shipments. A significant portion of the world's inventory starts in China. So our APAC presence is very large in China and in Japan. We also have a very large presence in Europe, South America, as well as our headquarters in North America. But truly having people on the ground, understanding port regulations, real-time black swan events, technology partnership, that's so critical in having an end-to-end visibility. And that's the beauty of the supply chain, is that nothing is single source in a single region, in a single location with a single technology platform and a single carrier. It's all about multifaceted partnerships, a 360-degree view of your supply chain. It's global in nature, so we've intentionally invested our network to be global and be distributed, be agnostic. And I think that's really important when you look at getting that next wave of visibility. It's understanding where are you sourcing from, what systems have that data, what people interact with the data, who would want to be aware of where that inventory is throughout the world today, and how can P44 with our established network or our onboarding efforts continue to expand our network. We have 270,000 connected carriers in network. We're tracking 99% of the world's ocean containerized freight. We continue to onboard thousands of carriers every single week. So it's a network effect, and that's the benefit of, I think, end-to-end visibility.
One of the things I try to do when having a conversation like this is put myself in the position of a supply chain executive. It sounds like such an incredibly powerful tool. It sounds like such an incredibly potent capability, but I have to think, where do I even start? How do I get my arms around this? And I have to think it's probably going to be either controlling costs or improving performance in some way. Maybe we can walk through each of those in turn. Controlling costs as a place to start. Can we talk about that?
Certainly, and you read my mind. I think not overcomplicating where an executive focuses their time. It's either revenue generating or cost optimization. On the cost mitigation front, I think it's really important to understand like attention to demurrage. D&D, everyone was getting really impacted during COVID, but still to this day, $2, $3, $4, $5 million is pretty common across larger enterprises. And one of our customers just focused on reducing D&D at their for demurrage as well as at their yard. In a matter of 2 months, they wiped out $2 million of attention demurrage because they're just focused on container pickup, last free day, and reducing dwell at their yard. So I think if you really focus on where the cost is impacting you most, you tend to have a natural footprint of what's backing in and what's leading into that pain. And then you can optimize carrier performance, pickup availability, and it's a really, really strong cost mitigation strategy.
And then on the other side, of course, we've got performance improvement, which drives its own growth.
Yeah, and then that's a great point because in general, supply chain, people want to focus on every brand, every division, every manufacturing region. I always say focus on a line of business or a product flow. If you focus on the core origin of manufacturing, where it's assembled, where it's completed, where it's delivered, you tend to follow multiple transfer points. Capital is always tied up in inventory in transit, or it's being expedited for a certain region. But if you focus on too many lines of business or too many product lines to start, you tend to have a incremental value across the board. But if you just focus on maybe a line of business or a manufacturing team, you tend to follow the life cycle of a product, and you understand where the bottlenecks are, where are the transfer points that are impacting your delivery, and that end consumer, the second it hits that person's doorstep, for example, you have to look at all the steps that it takes to get there. So if you focus on a critical line of business or a critical product line, you tend to understand this can be magnified across all of our business globally. So follow all the transfer points rather than saying, I want to improve my ocean availability. Well, that's pretty broad. What about the domestic teams? What about the DC teams? So following transfer points is my number one piece of advice for revenue generation.
Fantastic. We have covered a lot of ground in this conversation. If there are one or two key takeaways you want people to think about further, what would you want to highlight for them?
I would highlight that this industry is finally at the opportunity for you to take action and actually get a global view of how your network performs, what impact it has on your bottom line, as well as your top line. But you can't fix if you can't measure it. So start measuring it today, understand carrier performance, understand inventory in transit, where are your bottlenecks, which lanes are more delinquent than others, understand the impact it has downstream. And once you start to measure it, you really understand how can I use data to my advantage. Right now, you're beholden primarily to what's told to you, but take advantage of that. Get it in your hands, get a 360-degree view of your supply chain, and use that data to improve your business operations moving forward. At the end of the day, visibility platforms like Project 44 are meant to help you take action before things go wrong or ensure that business runs optimally based on business as usual. But we're trying to give you the data to take action before things go awry. And that's, I think, where visibility is starting to empower multiple layers of the business, from executives who want to understand performance quarter over quarter to daily transportation analysts to help with that, where's my order, down to optimizing yard efficiency and production plant planners. It's really important to start giving data where people will consume it and use it and then optimize it.
So first of all, that's a great way to wrap things up. And I love that you used the very specific examples, because I think anyone who has been listening to this is probably thinking of their own pain points right now. For people who do have their own questions, want to learn more, what is the best way to get in touch? Project 44
is a global company. Any Project 44, contact us, Alias. We're over 10 languages natively supported throughout the world. So get in touch with your regional stakeholders. I run a lot of our customer and business teams here. I'm happy to facilitate introductions and support as needed. And I think it'll be a great time.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Chris. It's clearly a very exciting time for Project 44, and visibility is something that is always important in supply chains, and it sounds like there's some exciting things happening right now that are worth talking about. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me.
Pleasure being here.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.